The morning of Layla's wedding, her mother burned the toast. It was such a small, ordinary thing, the smell of charred bread drifting through the apartment while someone pinned flowers into Layla's hair, but it made Layla laugh, and that laugh broke something open in her chest, some knot of anxiety she had been carrying for weeks. She laughed until her eyes watered, and her mother rushed in from the kitchen with a towel still in her hands, and they both stood there laughing together in the narrow hallway while the hairdresser sighed and started the curls again. It was the kind of morning she would remember for the rest of her life. Not for the dress, which was ivory and simple and exactly what she had wanted. Not for the flowers, which were white roses and sprigs of eucalyptus. But for the burned toast and the laughter, and the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous without knowing quite what she was stepping into. She was marrying Daniel Ashworth. That was the strange part. That was the part she still turned over in her mind like a coin she couldn't identify, trying to find the face on it. She had known him for 11 months. They had met at a conference in Edinburgh. She was a structural engineer presenting a paper on adaptive load distribution in urban bridges, and he was sitting in the third row taking notes in a small black notebook. He was not the most handsome man in the room. He was quiet. He had dark eyes and a habit of pausing before he spoke, as though he chose his words the way a careful man chooses his footing on uncertain ground. After her presentation, he had waited until the crowd around her thinned, and then he had asked her one question, a good question, a precise question about the tension coefficients she had used in her second case study, and she had answered it, and he had nodded slowly, and they had ended up talking for 2 hours in the hotel lobby until the conference dinner started without them. She remembered thinking, "This is unusual." She was not someone who lost track of time. She was a woman who kept a physical planner, who set alarms for things that did not require alarms, who had once been told by an ex-boy friend that loving her was like loving a train schedule. She had not found this insulting. She had taken pride in it, but Daniel made her lose track of time. And 3 months later he had come to London, where she lived, with an excuse about a project review that she later suspected had never existed. He had texted her from the train station, and she had met him at a cafe near her office, and they had talked for 6 hours, and he had taken the last train back to Manchester looking pleased with himself in a way she found both irritating and disarming. By month 6, she was driving to Manchester on weekends. By month 8, she had cleared a drawer for him in her flat. By month 10, he had asked her to marry him in her kitchen while she was making pasta, not kneeling, not with any particular ceremony, just turning to her with the ring in his open palm and saying her name the way he always said it, like it was a word he had been saving. She said yes. She had not known what else to say, which was the truest way of explaining it. She said yes because she meant it, because something about him felt inevitable in a way she could not engineer or diagram. She said yes, and they had gotten married 11 months after meeting in Edinburgh, on a Saturday in October, in a small church in her mother's village in Shropshire. The service was at 2. At noon, while her mother was arranging flowers in the church and the hairdresser was finishing the final pin, Layla sat at the window of her childhood bedroom and looked out at the lane and thought, as she had thought many times in the past weeks, "I am marrying a stranger," not in the way that meant she had doubts, not in the way that meant she did not love him, but in the way that meant she understood how little two people can know of each other in 11 months, how much the rest of a life is composed of rooms you have not yet entered. She did not know, for instance, that Daniel Ashworth had loved her for 15 years. She did not know this because there was no reason she should have. They had not met in Edinburgh, or rather, they had met before Edinburgh, in a way that she had never registered and he had never forgotten. He had first seen her in 2009 in Leeds at the open day for the civil engineering program at the university. He was 19, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large for him, standing in a queue to speak to one of the department advisors. She was 18, wearing a red coat, arguing cheerfully with her friend about whether the load-bearing columns in the atrium were aesthetically necessary or just pretentious. He had listened to her for 30 seconds and felt something shift inside him with the quiet precision of a key turning in a lock. He did not speak to her that day. He was not the kind of young man who spoke to strangers easily, and she was surrounded by friends and animation and laughter, and he watched her from across the room the way you watch something you are certain belongs in the world but are not certain belongs to you. They were both accepted to the program. This was either fate or coincidence, and Daniel, who was not a sentimental man, would have told you it was coincidence, except that he had been accepted to 2 other universities, and he had chosen Leeds, and he had chosen Leeds because of her, though he had not admitted this to himself for several years. He learned her name in the first week, Layla Hassan. He said it to himself sometimes while he walked between lectures, not with any particular intention, just to hold it somewhere outside his mind for a moment. He sat near her in 3 of their 4 first-year modules. He sat near her in the way that a person sits near a source of warmth in a cold room, not so close as to be obvious, not so far as to lose the warmth. They spoke, of course they spoke. 4 years of the same degree program, and they spoke dozens of times, hundreds of times across tutorials and group projects and late nights in the library. He was someone she liked, she told her friend in their second year, pointing him out. Daniel Ashworth, the quiet one, he always knows the answer, but he doesn't make a thing of it. He's decent. He was someone she liked, which was so much less than what she was to him, and he understood this, and he accepted it, because he was not a man who believed that what he felt entitled him to anything. In their third year, they were assigned to the same project group. 6 weeks of working alongside each other, and Daniel had known by the end of the first week that this was either the best or worst thing that could have happened to him. She was brilliant at it. She was genuinely, specifically brilliant. She could hold a structural problem in her mind and rotate it like a 3-dimensional object, seeing stress points that other people missed, and she had the vocabulary for what she saw, precise and efficient, and she also had the habit of occasionally doodling small animals in the margins of her notes, which had nothing to do with her intelligence, and everything to do with why he was so completely lost. He did not tell her. He would not tell her. He was aware that what he felt had moved past ordinary attraction into something more serious, something that sat at the center of his life like a fixed point, and he was aware that this was not something he could speak aloud without changing things irreversibly. She was his friend. She trusted him. He valued that trust more than he valued his own comfort. They graduated in 2013. She went to London. He went to Manchester, which was not running away, or not only running away. It was also a good job, a real opportunity, exactly what he had worked for. He told himself both things and believed both things simultaneously. In the years that followed, they were loosely connected in the way of people who shared a significant chapter and then diverged. They appeared in each other's professional orbit occasionally, a mutual linked in connection here, a shared conference attendance there. He followed her career. Not obsessively, not in a way that would have alarmed anyone, just in the way that you track the trajectory of someone who matters to you when you have no other way to stay close. He knew she was doing important work. He knew she had been published. He knew from a mutual friend that she had dated someone for 3 years and that it had ended badly, and he had felt an awful complicated mixture of sadness for her and a guilt he would not look at directly. He had relationships. He was not a monk, not a man who wore his devotion like a hair shirt. He dated women he respected and cared for. He was thoughtful and present and honest, and his relationships ended always, not dramatically but gently, with a mutual acknowledgement that something was missing, some particular frequency that he was always listening for and never quite hearing. He told himself it had nothing to do with Layla. He was not always convincing. When he saw the Edinburgh conference on his schedule, structural engineering, adaptive systems, urban infrastructure, he registered for it without examining his motives too carefully. She was on the list of presenters. He had told himself this was not why he was going. He had almost believed this. And then he had sat in the third row and watched her take the podium and speak about bridge tension coefficients with the focused intensity he had been watching for 15 years. And he had thought, there it is, that frequency, there it is. He had waited for the crowd to clear. He had asked her the question about the tension coefficients because it was a genuine question, and also because it was a way in. And she had answered him, and then something had opened between them, like a door he had never been able to find before, and they had talked for 2 hours, and he had known, with a certainty that had nothing mystical about it, that this was the moment he had been moving toward. He had not told her any of this. Not in the hotel lobby, not on the subsequent weekends in Manchester, not on the evening he stood in her kitchen holding a ring on his open palm. He had said her name, Layla, and offered her everything he had and left the rest unsaid, because some things do not need to be offered as explanations. Some things simply are. She said yes, and he had stood there for a moment with his hand still open, the ring still between them, feeling the weight of 15 years settle into something he could finally put down. On the morning of the wedding, Daniel was in the vestry of the church, straightening his tie in a small mirror while his best man, a man named Oliver, who had been his friend since Manchester, told an inappropriately long story about a stag weekend that Daniel had largely blocked from memory. He was calm. People had expected him to be nervous. Oliver had expected it, had prepared a speech about it, but he was not nervous. He had been moving toward this day for a very long time. He had imagined many versions of it in 15 years of imagining. The real version, he found, was smaller and more ordinary and infinitely more precious than any of the imagined ones. There was a crack in the vestry ceiling that ran from the light fitting to the east wall. There were fold-up chairs stacked in the corner. There was Oliver talking about the stag weekend. It was nothing like what he had imagined, and it was exactly right. Layla walked down the aisle at 2:10, 7 minutes late because her mother's car had stalled in the lane, and she walked with her father's arm through hers and her eyes moving forward, and when she saw Daniel standing at the altar, she saw something in his face that she had not expected to see. Not nervousness, not the particular bright-eyed happiness of a man surprised by his own good fortune. She saw steadiness. She saw a man who had been standing at that altar, in some sense, for a very long time. She filed this observation away and kept walking. They said their vows. Daniel said his without looking at the card, which she had expected. He had the same quality with speeches that he had with everything else, a sense of having prepared quietly and thoroughly and in private. But the steadiness was there in his voice too, and she found herself thinking again about his face when she had first seen him across the church, that particular quality, like a fixed point, like a man who had already navigated to where he meant to be. They were pronounced married. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and someone in the congregation, her Aunt Miriam, almost certainly made a sound that was halfway between a sob and a laugh. The reception was in the village hall, which smelled of old wood and the ghost of previous celebrations, and someone had strung fairy lights along the rafters and laid the tables with small vases of white roses, and it looked, Layla thought, exactly like what it was, imperfect and genuine and warm. It was 3 weeks later, in their flat in London. Daniel had transferred to a London office, and they had spent the weeks after the wedding unpacking his boxes and rearranging the space around his presents that she found the notebook. She was not looking for it. She was looking for a pen, rummaging through a box he had not yet unpacked. A box labeled miscellaneous in his handwriting, and she found the notebook at the bottom. It was a small black notebook, not new, the cover worn at the corners, and she recognized it, or thought she did, and she opened it, expecting to find engineering notes. The first page had a date at the top, October 2009, and then, below the date, a name, her name. She sat down on the bedroom floor. The notebook was not a love letter, exactly. Daniel was not a man who wrote love letters. It was more like a series of careful observations, the kind of notes an engineer takes when studying something complex. Dates and brief entries written in his efficient handwriting. October 12, 2009. She argued with the department advisor about the tributary width calculation. She was right, he was wrong, and she was right, and she knew it, but she didn't make him feel it. I've never seen anyone do that. November 3, 2009. Group presentation. She stayed behind to take down the display boards because everyone else left early. She didn't make a thing of it. She just did it. The entries were not continuous. There were gaps of months, sometimes of years. But they were there, moving forward through time, and she read them with her back against the side of the bed and her hands very still. And somewhere in the middle of the third year of the notebook, she found an entry that was longer than the others. February 2012. I've been trying to figure out how to stop. Not because it's unbearable, it isn't. I'm not suffering. I just think it would be simpler, for me and for her, if I could reduce this to ordinary friendship. But I've looked at it from every angle I know, and I can't find the mechanism. It's structural, it's load, bearing. I think if I removed it, I'd lose something I don't want to lose. Something that makes me better at things, more awake to things. So I'm not going to try anymore. I'm just going to carry it. That seems fine. I've carried it this long. She sat with that for a long time. She was an engineer. She understood load, bearing structures. She understood the principle he was applying to himself. The idea that something carried long enough becomes part of the architecture, not a burden but a beam, integral to the thing standing upright. She understood it as metaphor, and she understood it structurally, and she understood it now, in the specific context of her own marriage, and she was not sure what she felt. She found the Edinburgh entry near the end of the notebook. September 2024. She was on the speaker list. I know what this means. I'm going to go. I'm going to ask her a real question and see what happens. And then, later in September, 2 hours in the hotel lobby. She hasn't changed, and she's entirely different, and I know that doesn't make sense, except that it's exactly right. She has this way of pausing just before she gets to the most important part, like she's making sure of her footing. I've watched her do this for 15 years. Watching her do it today, across a hotel lobby table, felt like coming home. She closed the notebook. She sat on the bedroom floor for a while longer, listening to the sounds of the flat, the boiler ticking, a bus going past outside, Daniel moving somewhere in the kitchen. She was constructing something in her mind, the way she always constructed things, assembling pieces and finding where they fit, building upward from foundation to load to line. She had married a stranger. This was what she had believed. 11 months, a conference, a kitchen proposal. A quick marriage by most standards. She had known she was marrying a man she did not fully know, had accepted the incompleteness of it as the nature of beginning, had trusted that the knowing would come with time. But the notebook changed the dimensions of what she was inside. She had married a man who had carried her for 15 years like something load-bearing, who had sat in the third row not by accident, who had asked her a precise and genuine question about tension coefficients and waited, afterward, for everything else, who had stood at the altar with that steadiness in his face, that quality she had noticed and filed away and not yet opened, because he had been standing there, in every sense that mattered, since he was 19 years old. She was not sure whether to be frightened. She examined the feeling and found that she was not frightened. She was something else. She was something that did not have a name in the engineering vocabulary. She most trusted something that felt, if she had to find a word for it, like the moment a structure settles into its final configuration, every load distributed to its intended point, every beam doing the work it was made for. She got up off the floor. She carried the notebook through the hallway and into the kitchen, where Daniel was making tea. He heard her and turned, and he saw the notebook in her hand, and for a moment she watched something move through his face. Not panic, not guilt, but a kind of quiet readiness, the expression of man who has known that a reckoning was possible and has decided, long ago, how he will meet it. She set the notebook on the kitchen counter. He looked at it, then he looked at her. She said, "How old were you?" He said, 19. She said, "The open day." He said, "You were arguing about the atrium columns, whether they were necessary." She said, "I remember that argument. I don't remember you. I know." She looked at him. She said, "This frightens me a little." He nodded. He said, "I know. I understand that." He picked up the notebook and held it in both hands, looking at the cover, and he said, "I want you to know that it was never something I held against you, not knowing me, not seeing me. I never wanted you to feel that you owed me something from all those years. That's not what any of this was." Then what was it? He thought about this in the way he thought about everything, with that pause of careful footing. He said, "It was just true. It was just the truest thing I knew about myself for a very long time, and I didn't know what to do with it except carry it until I could offer it properly. And in Edinburgh, I thought I could offer it. I thought if I could just get one real conversation, one honest exchange, and she doesn't feel it, then I'll know, and I'll let it go." He set the notebook back on the counter. "But you felt it too. I could tell. 2 hours, and you felt it too." She had felt it. She had thought, standing at the window of her childhood bedroom on the morning of her wedding, that she was marrying a stranger. But she had also thought that whatever he was inevitable. She had thought, "I don't know what I'm stepping into, but I know the ground feels solid." She said, "You should have told me, yes. Before the wedding, you should have told me, yes, I know." He looked at her steadily. "I was afraid that it would sound like a claim, like I was telling you that you owed me something because I'd carried this for 15 years. I didn't want it to sound like that, so I kept waiting for the right way to say it, and the right way never came, and then we were getting married, and I thought I'd tell you after. I thought we'd have time." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the bus had turned around at the end of the road and was coming back, its engine a low, steady rumble. "The kettle clicked off," she said. "Did you tell anyone? Oliver, my best man, he's known for years." She thought about Oliver at the reception, watching Daniel during the speeches with an expression she had not been able to read at the time. She understood it now. She said, "He must have thought this was extraordinary. He thought I was a spectacular idiot for most of it. He might still think that." Something loosened in her chest. She said, "So you chose Leeds because of me." He said, "I chose Leeds because of you. And Manchester." Manchester was a good job. Manchester was also, yes, a good job I happened to be able to do from a city where I didn't have to watch you every day. She said, "Edinburgh." He said, Edinburgh was deliberate, completely deliberate. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. She picked up the notebook. She turned it over in her hands. She thought about the entry from 2012, its load, bearing, and she thought about the atrium columns in the Leeds Open Day, whether they were necessary or merely decorative. She had argued that they were both, that necessity and beauty were not incompatible, that a column could hold the weight of a building and also be worth looking at. She had been right, and Daniel had apparently thought so from across the room. She said, "I need to ask you something. Yes. All those years, the 15 years, were you happy?" He thought about this genuinely. The way she had come to know, he thought about genuine questions. He said, "Mostly, there were hard parts. There were years when I told myself I was being ridiculous and I should simply recalibrate. But mostly yes. It made me better, I think, more awake, like I said in the notebook. And now," he looked at her. He said, "Now I'm standing in my kitchen with you and you're holding my notebook and we've been married for 3 weeks. I don't know what word covers it." She thought, "Neither do I." She put the notebook on the counter. She said, "I'm going to be angry about the Edinburgh thing for a while, that you went there on purpose and didn't tell me. That seems right. And I'm going to need you to explain things, over time. I'm going to ask you things, and I need you to tell me the truth about all of it." "I will." She said, "I believed I was marrying someone I was just beginning to know." "You were, but you weren't." He said quietly, "I was beginning to know you the way I get to know you now. Layla, the person you've been to me for 15 years, that's not the same person as my wife. My wife is someone I've known for 11 months and someone I'm still learning. The girl in the notebook is someone I watched from a distance, someone I respected and wanted to know and couldn't. I'm not married to that girl, I'm married to you." She stood in the kitchen for a long moment. She thought about their first conversation. She thought about the precision of his question about the tension coefficients, how it had told her something about his mind before he had said anything else, that he read carefully, that he thought before he spoke, that he was interested in the structures beneath surfaces. She had thought, at the time, that this was a man she was just encountering. It had not occurred to her that he was a man who had been reading her carefully for 15 years. But then, all of it had always been true. The 2 hours in the hotel lobby, the weekends in Manchester, the way he said her name, all of it had been true before she knew any of this, and it was still true now. The notebook did not make any of it less. It made it more. It extended it backward through time like a supporting column that went deeper into the ground than she had known. She said, "Make the tea." He looked at her. She said, "The kettle clicked off 5 minutes ago, and I'd like a cup of tea." He turned and made the tea, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and after a moment he brought 2 mugs over and sat across from her, and the notebook sat on the counter where she had left it. Neither of them looking at it, she said, "I want to read the rest of it." "All right. Not tonight, eventually, whenever you want." They drank their tea. Outside the light was fading, that particular October fading that she had grown up with in Shropshire, the evenings coming in fast and golden and then going cold. She thought about the morning of her wedding, the burned toast, her mother's laughter, the feeling of standing at the edge of something enormous. She had been right that she did not know what she was stepping into. She had also been right that the ground felt solid. She said, 15 years is a very long time to carry something." He said, "Yes." She said, "You must have nearly told me 100 times." He said, "I nearly told you on the night of the 3rd year project presentation. We were last to leave the building and it was raining and I thought I almost said it. But I didn't think it would help you. I thought it would only complicate things for you when it was already complicated enough." She said, "It would have complicated things. I know. It would have complicated them in a way I might have needed." He was quiet. She said, I'm not saying I wished you had. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm thinking about the version of things where you said it. The girl who would have heard it at 20, too. He said, she wasn't ready for it. No, she wasn't. She looked at him, were you? He said, no, neither of us was. She thought about structure again, the way she always thought about structure. A bridge designed for a load it cannot yet bear will fail. The timing of load introduction matters as much as the load itself. She thought about the version of events where he had said something in 2012, in the rain after the presentation, and she thought about who she had been then and who he had been then, and she thought, no, neither of them had been ready. The 15 years were not wasted years. They were the years the structure needed to become what it needed to be. She did not say this aloud. It was the kind of thought that sounded, when spoken, more tidy than feelings were. She kept it instead as something she knew. She said, we're going to be all right. He said, yes. I mean it. I'm not saying it to reassure you. I'm saying it because I've looked at the structure, and I think it holds. He smiled at that, not the usual small smile but something wider, something that changed his whole face, and she thought, I have not seen that before. She thought, that is something I get to learn. She picked up her mug. She said, tell me something I don't know, not from the notebook, something you've never told anyone. He thought about it. He said, the question I asked you in Edinburgh, about the tension coefficients. Yes. I already knew the answer. She stared at him. He said, I'd read the paper twice before the conference. I knew your methodology. The question was, it was a real question, it wasn't false, but I already knew what you were going to say. She set down her mug. She said, you absolute. He was smiling again. She said, that's very manipulative. He said, I prefer prepared. She said, you prefer prepared. She looked at him. You prepared a question to ask me that you already knew the answer to. I wanted to hear you answer it. I wanted to see if it felt the way I thought it would feel. And did it? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it was a good question. I know. I mean it. Even knowing what I know now, it was a genuinely good question. It was the kind of question that told me who you were. He said, that's what I wanted. She sat with that. The kitchen was warm, and the evening was coming down outside, and her tea was going cold. She looked at the man across from her, the man she had married 3 weeks ago, believing he was someone she was just beginning to discover. And she understood that he was still that man. He was still someone she was beginning to discover. The 15 years were behind him, but he was sitting in front of her, and there were rooms in him she had not yet entered, and she was going to enter them slowly, in the way that you enter, something you have decided to inhabit for the rest of your life. She thought about the morning of the wedding, the burned toast, her mother laughing in the narrow hallway. She had thought, I am stepping into something enormous, and I do not know what it is. She knew now that it was this, a man who had loved her in silence for 15 years and had chosen, when the time came, to speak not with declarations, not with the weight of debt and accumulation, but with a precise question about tension, coefficients in a hotel lobby, patient and honest and careful. She knew it was this, a kitchen table, 2 cooling mugs of tea, a black notebook on the counter, a structure that went deeper into the ground than she had known, which was not a frightening thing, but an anchoring one. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Outside, the October evening settled in, gold going gray, going dark. The boiler ticked. Somewhere a door opened and closed. They sat in the kitchen in the quiet that had grown between them now, not the quiet of people who have nothing to say, but the quiet of people who have found that they can be still together, that they can let the weight of things settle without needing to speak it all at once. There was time. That was the thing she had not understood about love at 20. 2. the thing she understood now. There was time to know a person, and then more time, and then more. There was time to ask all the questions and hear all the answers. There was time to enter all the rooms. She was not afraid of the rooms. She was, if she was honest, and she had always prided herself on honesty, on the kind of precise clear-eyed seeing that had made her good at bridges, she was moved. She was moved by the span of it, by the patience of it, by the fact that this man had carried something load-bearing and careful and private across 15 years of ordinary life, and had set it down in front of her not as a demand but as an offering. She was moved the way a bridge is moved by the weight it is designed to carry, not bending but responding, every fiber doing the work it was made for. She squeezed his hand. He turned his palm over and held hers. She looked at the notebook on the counter and thought, "I will read it all. I will read every word of it. Not tonight, but eventually I will sit with every entry and I will know what it was like to be loved from a distance, and then closer and then close. And I will understand something about this man. That cannot be understood any other way," she said. "I'm glad you came to Edinburgh," he said. "So am I." She said, "I'm glad you asked a question you already knew the answer to." He said, "I'm glad you answered it the way I thought you would." She said, "Daniel." He said, "Yes." She said, "I think we're going to be very good at this." He looked at her the way he had looked at her from the altar, with that steadiness, that quality of having navigated a very long way to arrive at a particular point and finding, when he got there, that it was exactly what he had moved toward. He said, "I think we are too." The tea was cold. Neither of them moved to warm it. Outside, the last of the October light left the sky, and the kitchen lamp made its own small world of them, and the notebook sat on the counter carrying its 15 years quietly, the way all load-bearing things do, not announcing itself, not asking for acknowledgement, simply holding the structure upright until the structure no longer needed it. She had married a stranger. She was still married to him. She was going to be married to him for a very long time. And the stranger, it turned out, was someone who had known the weight of her name since he was 19 years old and had never put it down. She found, sitting in her kitchen in the October dark with his hand over hers, that this was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, everything.